Okay, is this even Book of Boba Fett anymore? I mean, come on. I have so many opinions on episode 6 of Book of Boba Fett, and I'm probably going to be in the minority in most of them. I'm extremely conflicted about this episode, and I'm sure people are going to disagree with me a lot about this, but this episode makes no sense in the context of this story. The Book of Boba Fett as a show is just a mess right now. It has been completely hijacked by what should have been in Mandalorian Season 3, and the conflict on Tatooine just seems so minuscule at this point, and Boba Fett's story and arc is just completely sidelined for obviously something we care about and love. And of course, I love seeing all this stuff. Of course, I love seeing Luke train Grogu. Of course, I love seeing Mando wanting to go talk to Grogu and reunite with him. Of course, I love seeing Ahsoka freaking talk to Luke, Anakin's son. But what is it doing in the middle of Book of Boba Fett? Why is this not in season 3 of Mandalorian? I'm thinking about all the people that weren't going to watch Book of Boba Fett, like my dad. My dad really likes The Mandalorian, and now he's going to watch season 3 of Mando and be like, wait, what happened between what? And then I'm going to have to be like, oh, you have to watch Book of Boba Fett, which is about Boba Fett on Tatooine fighting the Pike Syndicate, but really it's more about getting these little important bits of knowledge about Luke, Grogu, Ahsoka, and Mando. Just the last 2 weeks have been the best episodes of Book of Boba Fett, and Boba Fett might have said 2 lines in all of them. And the best parts of it were not happening on Tatooine, which is where the story was based. Like, the first 4 episodes of Book of Boba Fett just feel like a whole different dimension now. And the conflict with him and his character is just so minuscule at this point. Did I love this episode? I mean, of course! We've seen things that we've been waiting to see. Ahsoka and Luke being in the same frame and talking is so amazing. Luke being like, I don't think his heart is in it. And Ahsoka being like, you're just like your father. And Luke face just like melting. He's like, oh my gosh. What I think she meant by this was that Anakin sometimes doubted himself a lot. And Luke kind of thought it was a reflection of him that Grogu wasn't succeeding in this Jedi training, at least up until that point. And I think Ahsoka kind of recognized that. But that's literally something we didn't even know would happen. But last season we saw Luke enter the frame and we knew Ahsoka was there. And we're like, wow, imagine they had a heart-to-heart about Anakin. And we got a little piece of that here. I pray to God that we get a little more in Mandalorian Season 3. But she did say, maybe I'll come back. Maybe I won't. But it was really awesome to see Ahsoka kind of checking in on Luke and really getting a big insight into Luke's character. He's almost like figuring out how to be a master, even though he was so confident in Return of the Jedi. He's still figuring out how to become this master and taking on the role of Yoda in Empire Strikes Back and, having the roles reversed of the Grogu species and Yoda species being the student and Luke being the master. It was really awesome to see him do all the Dagobah stuff. He put him on his back and he was doing the jumping and the flipping, all callbacks to his training with Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, of course. But again, I will say something here that probably people will hate. I think there's too much Luke. I think Luke was a special treat at the end of Mandalorian Season 3, and it was like a unique experience. But getting like 30 minutes of Luke in this episode, it was almost like too much of a good thing, if you know what I mean. I do love, once again, I'm very conflicted about this. I do love that Luke's character is like growing. Like, you're still learning more about his character and they're building on him right now. It's really cool to see this character 40 years later getting more story and more character development. I mean, that is awesome. And not being the older Luke in the sequel trilogy. The facial animations look like a million times better than they did at the end of season 2 of Mandalorian when he takes the hood off. I mean, this is like far and away almost, it looked realistic. I mean, if I showed that to anyone that watched the original trilogy, they'd be like, how did they get Mark Hamill to look like that? It was very impressive. And his voice, of course, was amazing. If you watched Mandalorian Season 2 gallery on the finale, you saw like they would cut together clips of Mark Hamill speaking, and it's basically like a robot speaking the same lines as Mark Hamill would. And then they're doing this facial thing where they take a bunch of photos and videos of Mark Hamill's voice or face over the years and implant them onto this guy's face. I mean, it looked incredible, but like they said, with great power comes great responsibility. They're using so much of Luke, it's almost scary. It's like he's actually there, which means they can pretty much do that with anyone at this point and bring back anyone they want. We see the Jedi temple that eventually burns down because Kylo kills all the Padawans. It's that rock formation. It's, it's a cool nod to the sequel trilogy. It's kind of, scary and haunting that it's just going to be there and we already know what happens. We find out Grogu is the first or he would be the first Padawan, which is, kind of so poetic that Luke would be training someone that looks like Yoda as his next Padawan. Oh my gosh. Like I said, all of this stuff is great. All of this stuff is good. That's not my issue with it. My issue with it is that it's in the middle of a story that it belongs nowhere near. I really think last episode was a great teaser for Mandalorian Season 3, even though Boba Fett wasn't even in the last episode, and I still think it took away from the story of Book of Boba Fett. I think it was a cool teaser for next season, and I think it would have been better if they just said, hey, I'm going to go help out Boba Fett on Tatooine. He saved my life a couple times. I'm going to go help him out. And then after that, I'm going to see Grogu. And that would have been perfect because then Season 3 would have opened up with Grogu on the planet. How much better would it have been? I mean, really think about this objectively. How much better would it have been if in Season 3 of Mando, the season premiere was Grogu and Luke training? And you see Mando show up and give him this gift. I mean, that would have been so much more impactful because it would have made sense for that story. But since it's in here, it's almost so jarring. I was trying to enjoy this episode, and like I said a million times, I did enjoy this episode. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, why is this happening now? I genuinely don't know what they were thinking, and I understand that people love this, and I totally get it, and I love it too. But it is very conflicting from a story standpoint because, here at Market Balance, I'm going to call it like I see it, and I'm not just going to say I love it because it's characters I love. It has to make sense for the story and the context that it's in, and I don't think it makes sense here. I really don't. And I know I sound like I'm ranting and I'm angry, but it's really just coming from a place of total, I'm getting pulled in both directions. Have I wanted to see Ahsoka and Luke in the same room for so long? Of course. Have I been waiting to see Grogu, even though it's only been half a year since I last saw Grogu? I wish they dragged out that a little bit more. That's another thing. The last scene we saw in Mandalorian was Mando and Grogu together. And then the first time we see the Mando, or the second time we see the Mando again in an episode, he's already back with Grogu. I feel like they should have, stretched that out to the point where we could really see him struggle with not being with them. I know maybe last episode you kind of got that, but it didn't feel long enough to really hit home that Mando's really missing him. And I feel like if they dragged it out more, it would have been way more impactful when he was looking at him from a distance as him and Luke were training. I don't know. It seems like a lot of missed opportunities, even though they did such a good job. Ahsoka was great in this episode. I love that she's kind of like this guardian. I love that she's Luke's senior. Thinking about that, of course it makes sense, but actually seeing it and be like, wow, Luke is looking up to her. She is the more veteran Jedi. It's just kind of a cool mind trick kind of thing. I loved the do or do not, there is no try lesson with Grogu. I think he said, don't try, just do, or something along those lines. And I love that. Another way that quote just gets recontextualized for people that might not have understood it from Yoda. I love that. And I haven't even gotten to the point where Cad frickin' Bane shows up in the most epic fashion. Literally just his silhouette and the hat from far away in the distance said everything. The way he walked, I was like, oh my gosh, he's here. And gotta be honest, he looked great in live action. I was so surprised how well they pulled that off. His voice, I couldn't tell if his voice was the same guy. It sounded like it, but it almost, wasn't. But I guess that's just the live action kind of flip and switch. I'm not sure if they used the same voice, but at some points it did sound like him. He was menacing. I love that he's folded into this with the Pike Syndicate. Makes so much sense. He's still just, out there wheeling and dealing, doing his thing. Doesn't look like he lost a step at all. Timothy Oliphant comes back as the marshal. I'm sure he's fine, but he got messed up. But it was nice to see him as well. Loved seeing the Jawas have the Krayt Dragon skull on top of their Sandcrawler. That was hilarious. I absolutely love that. But again, I'm gonna kind of do a backhand thing here and say I think Cad Bane's entrance would have been so much better and more impactful if it was just part of the Boba Fett story and not like bookmarked in behind this like monumental training with Grogu and Luke. I don't know. I hope I'm not the only one that thinks this way, and I don't think I am. I think there are going to be a couple of people that come out, especially the same people that were talking about last week's episode, like, yeah, this is great, but like this is in the middle of Book of Boba Fett, and the main character has just been completely sidelined for a story that should have been told in another season of a different show. And I know they did say that these shows would kind of cross over and blend together, but I thought they would do it a little more subtly. I thought, it would just be a little more integrated and not like, okay, here's all of Mando's story and then back to Tatooine with a totally different story. So, yeah, I mean, I like the conflict they're setting up. I mean, the Pike Syndicate and all that, but do I really care about it when I'm getting Grogu, Luke, Ahsoka, and Mando content? Not really, especially when you completely flip the switch and go to a different storyline. Like, I loved that they bombed the casino that we've been in so many times throughout the season. I love that they are adding stakes to this. I love that the Pike Syndicate is coming in. They're bringing in the big guns. They're bringing in Cad Bane. Who knows? They might bring in Bosk. They might bring in so many other great bounty hunters. And they're building up this amazing battle for this planet that we know so well. And I feel like they just took away from it by doing this Mando tangent. I don't know. Like I said, I hope I'm not the only one. I don't think I am. I think people will kind of recognize this. Some people, of course, are going to love it, and I don't blame them for that. Like I said, I love it too. I just think it's very messy, and it's very flip-floppy and jarring that the main story is just becoming so segmented. And I think it's going to come back together now, because I don't know what else we would see with Grogu. Like in the next episode, if they really go back to Grogu, picking either the Yoda's lightsaber, cool nod, or the chainmail, like it would just be, I hope they save that till season 3. I think the Mando storyline has to end here. Like it just has to. Mando just has to take a backseat to Boba Fett and just do the Tatooine story. They can't go back to the Jedi Temple and Luke and Grogu. Of course, it's amazing, but in the context of this show, I think it was misused. Sorry, not sorry. I'm sorry this is a ranting episode, but like I said, this is Star Wars Mark of Balance. You can't just fan service me into loving something. You can't just shove story into a completely other story and expect me to be like, okay, well, Luke's there and Grogu's there and Ahsoka's there. I love it. It doesn't work for me. It needs to fit into the context, and I don't think it fits into this context. I think a little snippet of it, a little bit of a teaser for next season would have been fine. Even just seeing Grogu and Luke, fine, just a little bit, but getting a whole episode of them training and Grogu making these monumental decisions about his future in the Book of Boba Fett, not even his show. I'm trying to think of like another way to frame this. I don't know. I'm probably at this point just ranting, and I hope it's been at least entertaining, and I hope you at least see where I'm coming from, and maybe if you have the same thoughts, but you didn't know, why it felt weird, or you weren't able to express them or something. I hope I'm kind of getting it out there for you, and you can kind of say, okay, yeah, he knows what I'm doing. But yeah, was this episode amazing? Of course. Did it make sense in the context of Book of Boba Fett? No. If I was Tamara Morrison, I'd be very upset right now, because he's like, oh, finally I got my own show. And then, oh, the Mando and Yoda and Ahsoka and Luke are all taking my show. I don't know. I'm very excited to hear everyone else's opinions on this. I'm sure this will go over amazingly. I'm sure everyone will absolutely lose their minds over this episode. And maybe in a couple days, I'll kind of understand what they were trying to do. And that Book of Boba Fett wasn't exactly like a central storyline. It was very fluid, and I'll come around to it. Maybe I'll rewatch the episode and, appreciate it a little more instead of seeing it for the first time as a first impression. Seeing it a second time, I might be able to sit back and really enjoy it. But as of right now, these are all my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed them, as I said. Can't wait to hear your opinions. I'm sorry if this was ranty or ravey or it sounded like I was like upset. I'm I love it. It's Star Wars. It's awesome. I'm just saying I'm very conflicted about how this story is being told. So, okay, here's the last way I could phrase it. This would have been one of the best episodes of Mandalorian, and it's in the Book of Boba Fett. And that is a problem. I'll leave it at that. But let me know your thoughts. I'm very excited to hear everyone's opinions. At *_wars_ mark of balance. That's the Instagram. DM me, comments. I want to hear it all. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.